Morning sunlight streamed across the eastern fields of Oak Ridge Ranch, my family property for 3 generations. I stepped onto the porch with steaming coffee, surveying the landscape I had spent 15 years perfecting. Black Angus cattle dotted the green pastures, their coats gleaming in the early light. My pride and joy stood apart from the rest. Thunder, my top breeding bull, a perfect specimen that had taken years of careful genetic selection to produce. The ranch sat within the boundaries of Whispering Pines Estates, a rural development that had sadly come with a homeowners association. Most residents were farmers or had agricultural backgrounds, and for years, the HOA had existed mainly to maintain the community pond and organize the annual barbecue. That changed when the housing market brought wealthy city transplants to our quiet corner of the county. I noticed the pristine white SUV before I saw its driver. Linda Morrison, our new HOA president, parked at the edge of my property line. Her designer boots touched the gravel as she stepped out, clipboard in hand. This had become a weekly ritual since her election 6 months ago. The city woman with salon-perfect hair had never managed property larger than a suburban lawn, yet somehow she now governed our rural community standards. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she called, voice carrying across the fence line. "Just doing my regular inspections." She made notes while walking the perimeter of my front pasture, measuring the height of my fence with a retractable tape measure. I set down my coffee and walked to meet her. "Morning, Linda. Finding any problems today?" I kept my tone neutral despite the intrusion. My father had taught me that neighborly peace was worth swallowing small annoyances. "Your fence height exceeds our guidelines by 3 inches, she said without looking up from her clipboard. "And these cattle feeding stations are visible from the road. The aesthetic standards clearly state all agricultural equipment must be stored out of sight from community roadways." I inhaled slowly. "These are working cattle pastures, Linda. The feeders need to be accessible." She smiled thinly. "The HOA bylaws apply to everyone, regardless of property use. We moved here for the rural charm, not to see farming equipment. Several new residents have complained." "This has been a working ranch for over 70 years, I replied. "The HOA was formed with the understanding that agricultural properties would maintain their function." Linda tapped her pen against her designer glasses. "Times change. Property values are our priority now. I will be sending a formal notice about the violations." She turned toward her vehicle, then paused. "Also, your bull in the north pasture, quite impressive. Do you show him?" "Thunder is a breeding bull," I explained, pride momentarily overriding my irritation. "Championship bloodlines. His calves sell for top dollar across 3 states." "Interesting," she said without genuine interest. "Well, remember you have 30 days to address the violations before fines begin." I watched her drive away, the knot in my stomach tightening. Similar interactions had played out weekly, each one increasing the tension between my traditional rural practices and her vision of a curated countryside experience. The HOA under Linda had begun reinterpreting bylaws that had existed for decades, suddenly finding violations where none had been cited before. That evening, I watched Thunder leading the herd across the north pasture toward the barn. His powerful frame moved with surprising grace for an animal weighing over 2,000 pounds. Each calf he sired brought between $5,000 and $10,000, his genetics highly prized throughout the region. More than just income, he represented my life's work in selective breeding. I had no way of knowing that Linda's seemingly innocent question about Thunder had been anything but casual curiosity. I could not have imagined the catastrophe that would unfold in just 3 days, or how one woman's entitlement would threaten everything I had built. The crack of a rifle echoed across my property, jolting me from sleep at dawn. I sat upright, instantly alert. November 15th, opening day of deer season. But no one had permission to hunt on my land. I had posted "no hunting" signs along every boundary after losing a calf to a stray bullet 2 years prior. Through my kitchen window, I spotted 3 unfamiliar trucks parked along the fence line of my east pasture. Orange hunting vests moved between the trees at the edge of my property. I pulled on boots and a heavy jacket, anger building with each second. My property lines were clearly marked. These were not neighbors who might have made an honest mistake. I drove my truck across the pasture, dust billowing behind me. 3 men turned as I approached, rifles casually slung over their shoulders. Their relaxed postures suggested they believed they belonged there, which only intensified my confusion and anger. "This is private property," I called out, stepping from my truck. "No hunting allowed. The signs are posted every 50 feet along the boundary." The oldest of the 3 men, gray-haired with an expensive-looking rifle, stepped forward. "We have permission to be here. Community hunting access through the HOA." "That is not possible," I replied. "The HOA has no authority to grant hunting access on private property." "Look, buddy, we paid good money for this," another hunter said, younger and more confrontational. "We have the paperwork right here." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded the document, a sinking feeling in my stomach. It was an official-looking letter on HOA letterhead. "This letter grants hunting access to all open areas within Whispering Pines estates, including field and forest lands, to the bearer for the duration of deer season." The bottom bore Linda Morrison's signature and official HOA stamp. "This is invalid," I stated, my voice tight with anger. "The HOA cannot grant access to my private property without my consent. This is trespassing." "Not according to the lady in charge," the third hunter shrugged. "She specifically mentioned good deer hunting in this area." A distant, pained bellowing sound carried across the morning air, a sound that froze my blood. Not the normal morning calls of my cattle, but the distressed cry of an animal in severe pain. "Stay here," I ordered, already running to my truck. The hunters exchanged concerned glances, suddenly less certain of their position. I drove frantically toward the sound, praying it was not what I feared. The north pasture came into view, and with it, a sight that would haunt me for years. Thunder lay on his side near the pond, his massive body heaving with labored breaths. Blood soaked the ground beneath him. I slammed to a stop and ran to his side. Thunder's eyes rolled toward me, filled with pain and confusion. The bullet had entered his flank and appeared to have traveled through his lower abdomen. My hands trembled as I called my veterinarian, Dr. Peterson. "James, emergency at Oak Ridge. Thunder has been shot. Bullet wound to the abdomen. He is breathing but losing blood." My voice cracked despite my efforts to remain calm. "On my way. Apply pressure if you can do it safely." 15 minutes, Dr. Peterson replied. The hunters had followed in their vehicle, their faces pale as they realized what had happened. "We were aiming at a buck," the older man said quietly. "It ran behind your cattle. The shot must have missed." "You had no right to be here," I said, my voice dangerously quiet as I knelt beside my suffering bull, pressing a clean shirt against the wound. "This bull is worth $50,000 and is the cornerstone of my breeding program." Their faces drained of color at the figure. "The HOA woman said it was all approved," the younger hunter insisted, waving the permission slip again. "She took our hunting fees herself." Dr. Peterson arrived with his assistant, equipment already prepared. For the next hour, they worked feverishly to stabilize Thunder, administering fluids, antibiotics, and pain medication. The bullet had to remain until they could get him to a facility with surgical capabilities. "We need to transport him," Dr. Peterson finally said. "I have arranged for emergency transport to the large animal surgical center in Glendale. It is going to be touch and go, James." As the specialized trailer arrived and the delicate process of moving the sedated bull began, I turned to the hunters, who had remained at a distance, visibly shaken. "I want copies of everything, that permission slip, receipts for any payments to the HOA, all communication. This is not over." Their leader nodded solemnly. "We never would have fired if we had known. We trusted the paperwork. I am truly sorry." I could not find forgiveness in that moment. All I could see was Thunder's suffering and the potential destruction of 15 years of careful breeding work. The hunter's ignorance and Linda's malicious overreach had created this disaster. As I followed the transport trailer carrying my sedated bull, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Linda Morrison would answer for this betrayal. The large animal veterinary center buzzed with activity as teams of specialists worked on Thunder. Dr. Peterson had called ahead, and the surgical team was prepped before we arrived. I paced the waiting area for 3 hours, calculating losses with each step. Beyond the immediate value of Thunder himself, the projected income from his breeding schedule for the upcoming spring season exceeded $100,000. 15 years of careful genetic selection, potentially destroyed by one careless bullet. "We were able to remove the bullet," Dr. Sullivan, the lead surgeon, explained when he finally emerged. "It missed major organs but caused significant tissue damage. The reproductive tract sustained trauma." He paused, his expression grim. "We will not know the full extent of the damage to his breeding capabilities until he recovers, but I must prepare you for the possibility that he may never breed again." The words hit me like physical blows. "Cost is not an issue," I said. "Do whatever is necessary." "We will," he assured me. "The initial surgery and 5 days of intensive care will run approximately $20,000. I signed the forms without hesitation. Thunder was not just livestock. He represented my ranch's future and my family's legacy of quality breeding stock. Once Thunder was stabilized, rage propelled me across town to Linda Morrison's meticulously landscaped property. Her pristine white SUV sat in the circular driveway of her oversized colonial home, the largest house in our rural community, and a constant subject of her boasting at HOA meetings. I pressed the doorbell with unnecessary force. Linda opened the door, surprise flashing across her face before her practiced smile returned. "James Harrison, this is unexpected. The HOA office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays if you need to discuss your compliance issues. My prize breeding bull was shot this morning by hunters you personally authorized to access my private property," I stated, my voice controlled despite the fury coursing through me. She blinked several times, then adjusted her designer glasses. "Come in. Several board members are here for our monthly planning meeting. We can discuss this properly." I followed her into an immaculate living room where 4 other HOA board members sat around a coffee table covered with papers. I recognized Robert from the feed store, Maria, who owned the property adjacent to mine, and 2 newer residents I had met only in passing at community events. "James claims there has been an incident with hunters on his property," Linda announced to the group, her tone suggesting mild inconvenience rather than serious accusation. I placed the hunting permission letter on the coffee table. "These hunters had this. Your signature, Linda. You authorized hunting on my private property without my knowledge or consent, and now my $50,000 breeding bull has been shot. He may never breed again." The other board members leaned forward to examine the document. Robert frowned, looking genuinely concerned. "The HOA bylaws clearly state we control communal land use," Linda replied smoothly. "Hunting permissions fall under recreational use management." "My property is not communal land," I countered. "It is private property with agricultural zoning. The HOA has no authority to grant access to private lands." "Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding," Maria suggested, looking uncomfortable. Linda waved dismissively. "The language in the bylaws is open to interpretation. Besides, your commercial farming operation has already been the subject of multiple complaints. It violates the residential character our community is trying to maintain." "Commercial farming. My family ranch predates your development by decades. The HOA was formed with explicit protection for existing agricultural operations." "Times change," Linda replied, the same phrase she had used days earlier. "Property values are our primary concern now. Your livestock operation negatively impacts the aesthetic quality of our neighborhood." Robert cleared his throat. "Linda, did the board vote on this hunting permission program? I do not recall it on any agenda." Linda glared at him briefly before composing herself. "It was handled as an administrative matter under my discretionary authority. The hunting fees will benefit our community beautification fund." "Those hunters said they paid you directly," I interjected. "They have receipts." "Processed through proper channels, of course," Linda snapped. "Now, if you are seeking compensation for your animal, you should contact your insurance. The HOA accepts no liability for accidents occurring during approved recreational activities." "You deliberately authorized hunting on my posted private property," I said, my voice rising. "This was not an accident. It was trespassing that you facilitated." "Be careful with accusations," Linda warned, her finger jabbing the air between us. "The HOA has significant legal resources. If you pursue this matter, we will be forced to address all your outstanding violations immediately, with maximum penalties." The other board members shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly the first they had heard of the hunting permissions, and Linda's threatening response revealed her true character. "Linda," Maria began cautiously, "perhaps we should discuss this properly as a board." "There is nothing to discuss," Linda interrupted. "Mr. Harrison needs to understand that his outdated farming practices are becoming incompatible with our evolving community standards. Perhaps this incident will encourage him to consider more appropriate land use." The statement hung in the air, revealing the malicious intent behind her actions. This had not been a simple administrative error. Linda had deliberately targeted my operation. I left without another word, my phone buzzing with an incoming text as I reached my truck. The veterinarian's final assessment had arrived. Significant trauma to reproductive tract. 90% probability of permanent breeding inability. Will continue treatment but prepare for worst-case scenario. 15 years of genetic selection work. Contracts with buyers across 3 states. All potentially destroyed because one entitled woman decided my legitimate agricultural operation offended her suburban sensibilities. As I drove home past Thunder's empty pasture, grief transformed into resolve. If Linda wanted war, she had just fired the first shot, but I would be the one to end it. The leather chair in the third law office creaked as I shifted my weight. Attorney James Wilson leaned back, his expression matching those of the previous 2 lawyers I had consulted. 3 different firms, 3 identical conclusions. HOA law is complicated, Wilson explained, removing his reading glasses. Their bylaws give them significant authority, and proving malicious intent would be difficult. The document she provided to the hunters creates plausible deniability that this was a simple administrative error. She authorized hunting on private property without consent, I argued. That has to be illegal. It is, he agreed. But the HOA itself could claim they believed they had that authority under an overly broad reading of the recreational use provisions. Courts tend to give HOAs considerable leeway in interpreting their own bylaws. I placed the growing stack of violation notices on his desk. Since the incident, she has issued 8 new violations against my property. Fence height, equipment placement, noise complaints about livestock. None of these were issues before. Wilson examined the papers. Selective enforcement is another potential angle, but difficult to prove without extensive documentation of similar violations she has ignored on other properties. What about the hunting fees? The hunters paid her directly. That is more promising, he acknowledged. If she accepted payment personally rather than through HOA accounts, that could constitute fraud or breach of fiduciary duty. But we would need those receipts and witness testimony. I left the office with a potential strategy but no guaranteed path forward. The legal battle would be lengthy, expensive, and uncertain. Meanwhile, Thunder's medical bills continued to mount. The insurance adjuster's call that afternoon delivered another blow. "Mr. Harrison, I have reviewed your claim regarding the injured bull," he began, his voice conveying genuine regret. Because the hunters had what appeared to be authorized access through the HOA permission document, this creates a complication. The incident does not clearly fall under trespassing damage coverage, and the hunters themselves were operating under apparent legitimate authorization. They were on posted private property without my consent, I protested. I understand, sir, but from an insurance perspective, they had documentation that appeared legitimate. We would need to see the outcome of any legal proceedings establishing that the HOA acted improperly before reconsidering the claim. When I hung up, I stared at the mounting pile of bills on my kitchen table. $20,000 for Thunder's emergency surgery and intensive care. Another $15,000 estimated for ongoing treatment and rehabilitation. The lost income from breeding contracts already signed for the spring season exceeded $100,000. My financial stability was crumbling by the day. The mailbox yielded 4 more violation notices, each carrying potential fines of $500. The pattern was clear. Linda was using HOA enforcement as a weapon, hoping to overwhelm me financially until I gave in. Even my community had fractured along invisible lines. Some neighbors brought food and offered support. Sarah Evans dropped off a homemade casserole, her husband Jason offering to help with farm chores while I spent time at the veterinary center. Others, particularly newer residents who had aligned themselves with Linda's vision, avoided eye contact at the local market or gas station. Each morning, I visited Thunder at the veterinary center before handling the daily ranch operations alone. The magnificent bull that had once commanded the pasture with powerful presence now lay listlessly in his large stall, eyes dulled by pain medication. The surgical wound was healing, but tests confirmed the veterinarian's initial fears. The damage to his reproductive system was irreversible. "I am sorry, James," Dr. Sullivan said, genuine compassion in his voice. "Physically, he should recover enough to live a comfortable life, but his breeding days are over." The drive home that evening was the darkest moment of my ordeal. Rain pounded the truck windshield, matching my mood as I pulled into my empty driveway. The kitchen table remained covered with mounting bills, legal correspondence, and violation notices threatening fines and liens against my property. The financial picture was grim. Without Thunder's breeding income, the ranch would struggle to remain profitable in the coming year. I sat in silence as the reality settled over me. The legal system offered no swift justice. Insurance would not cover my losses. The HOA under Linda's leadership would continue its campaign against me until I broke financially or gave up my agricultural operation. My grandfather's words echoed in my memory. When the system fails you, change the battlefield. He had been talking about a drought that nearly bankrupted the ranch 70 years ago, but the wisdom applied perfectly now. Linda believed her HOA power made her untouchable, that the complex bylaws and legal protections would shield her from consequences. She had never faced an opponent with nothing left to lose. I opened my laptop and began accessing the HOA website, downloading every document I could find. Bylaws, amendments, meeting minutes, financial reports. Linda had chosen this battlefield, but I would choose the weapons. If the traditional legal path offered no justice, I would need to find another way to expose her corruption and abuse of power. By midnight, the kitchen table had transformed from a shrine to my problems into a war room for solving them. Every document, every interaction, every violation notice represented a thread in the complex web Linda had woven. My task now was to find the single thread that, when pulled, would unravel her entire operation. The county records office smelled of old paper and industrial cleaning supplies. I had taken a day away from the ranch to begin my investigation properly, starting with public records. The clerk seemed surprised by my request. HOA filings for Whispering Pines Estates, all of them. That goes back 20 years, she said. Just the amendments and leadership changes for the past 5 years, I clarified, and any complaints or legal filings involving the association. 3 hours later, I had my first revelation. Linda Morrison had served on HOA boards in 3 different communities before moving to ours, each time following a similar pattern. She would join as a regular member, quickly ascend to leadership, implement aggressive enforcement policies, then move on within 2 to 3 years. More interesting were the timing of her departures. Each coincided with special financial audits requested by board members, though the audit results themselves were not in the public record. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. That evening, I discovered a community forum for her previous neighborhood. Residents there shared stories eerily similar to our situation: selective enforcement, reinterpretation of long-standing rules, and mysterious budget allocations for community improvements that seemed to benefit properties aligned with Linda's interests. One former neighbor wrote, "After she left, the audit revealed over $20K in questionable expenditures. By then she had already sold her house and moved on. New community, same playbook." Armed with this background, I turned my attention to our own HOA financial records. As a member in good standing, despite the recent violations, I had legal right to review financial statements. The HOA treasurer, a retired banker named Michael Fleming, seemed relieved when I requested to see the books. "I have been raising questions about some line items for months," he confided as he provided the records. "Linda insists everything is proper, but the documentation is suspiciously vague." The pattern emerged quickly. Over $35,000 in community improvements had been allocated since Linda took leadership, but the actual improvements were difficult to identify. The largest expenditures corresponded with enhancements visible only on properties belonging to her closest allies on the board. More suspicious was a new line item: Recreational Access Program, $12,500. There was no documentation explaining this program, no board vote authorizing it, and no record of where these funds had been deposited. My next stop was coffee with Robert Johnson, the board member who had questioned Linda about the hunting permissions during our confrontation. After some hesitation, he agreed to meet at a cafe in the neighboring town where we were less likely to be seen together. Linda never presented any hunting program to the board, Robert confirmed, stirring his coffee nervously. The first I heard of it was when you showed up that day. Since then, I have asked about the funds twice during executive sessions. She claims it is being held in a special projects account, but no one has seen the statements. He slid a folder across the table. The original HOA covenant from when the development was first established. Linda has been distributing edited versions that remove certain protections for agricultural properties. This is the real document with the original language. I opened it immediately to find a section highlighted in yellow. The association shall have no authority to grant recreational access to privately owned parcels without express written consent of the property owner. The language could not have been clearer. Why has no one challenged her? I asked. Robert sighed. She has formed a voting bloc with the newer residents. They outnumber the original farming families now. Most people do not want the conflict. Your situation is the most blatant overreach, but everyone has faced some form of intimidation. Armed with mounting evidence, I decided to document Linda's own property violations, a task that proved remarkably easy. Her oversized gazebo exceeded height restrictions. Her decorative fence violated the very setback requirements she had cited in my violations. Her elaborate landscape lighting exceeded the lumens permitted under the dark sky provisions she had recently enforced against 3 other properties. I photographed 17 distinct violations on her property alone, each one documented with specific bylaw references and measurements. The hypocrisy was astounding but unsurprising. The final piece came from an unexpected source. My phone rang with an unknown number while I was feeding cattle one evening. "Mr. Harrison, this is Mark Daniels. I was part of the hunting group on your property that day." His voice sounded hesitant. "I have been thinking about what happened. It does not sit right with me." "I appreciate the call," I replied carefully. "The thing is, we paid $2,500 for exclusive hunting rights through the HOA. Mrs. Morrison said it was a new program to generate community funds, but the receipt she gave us was weird. It was not an HOA receipt." My heart rate quickened. "Do you still have it?" "Yes, sir. It says L. Morrison Consulting at the top. We thought it was strange but figured maybe that was how the HOA processed special programs." "Would you be willing to share a copy of that receipt with me?" "Already scanned it. I will email it to you now. And sir, I am truly sorry about your bull. We were misled, but that does not excuse what happened." The email arrived minutes later. The receipt header clearly showed L. Morrison Consulting LLC rather than the Whispering Pines HOA. The payment description read Exclusive Hunting Access, Whispering Pines Open Lands, with a total of $2,500. Linda had not only authorized hunting on private property without consent, she had personally pocketed the money for doing so. I printed the receipt and added it to my growing evidence file. The threads of Linda's deception were coming together into a clear pattern of abuse of power and financial impropriety. The hunting permission that had nearly destroyed my livelihood was not just an overreach of authority. It was part of a personal profiteering scheme. That night, I visited Thunder in his recovery stall. The massive bull had lost weight but was standing now, his eyes clearer as the pain medications were reduced. He would survive as a living reminder of Linda's betrayal, but also as my motivation to ensure justice. "We are going to make this right," I promised him, stroking his broad forehead. The pieces were in place. Now it was time to assemble my allies and prepare for the confrontation that would end Linda's reign of terror once and for all. The conference room at the public library became my war room, documents covering every surface in carefully organized sections. 5 neighbors whose properties had suffered under Linda's reign gathered around the table, each bringing their own stories and evidence. "She forced me to tear down my garden shed last spring," Sarah Evans explained, organizing a stack of violation notices. "It had been there for 12 years, but suddenly it violated setback requirements by 8 inches. Michael Fleming, the retired accountant who served as HOA treasurer, spread financial statements across the table. "I have identified $37,500 in questionable allocations over the past 18 months. As treasurer, I am technically a signatory on all accounts, but Linda created this special projects account that only she can access." Jason Thompson, a lawyer who had recently moved to the community, reviewed my evidence with professional interest. "The hunting permission is your strongest point. Not only did she exceed HOA authority by granting access to private property, but she personally profited from it through her consulting company. That is a clear breach of fiduciary duty." We spent 3 hours organizing the evidence into a coherent narrative, identifying the clearest violations that would be immediately understandable to the average community member. The hunting permission scandal would be the emotional centerpiece, but the financial improprieties would likely cause the greatest legal trouble for Linda. The next morning, I met with County Wildlife Officer Alex Martinez regarding the hunting violations. He reviewed the permission letter Linda had provided to the hunters with growing concern. "This is completely invalid," he confirmed, making notes in his official report. "HOAs have no authority to override posted private property restrictions for hunting access. The hunters themselves could have faced trespassing charges, though in this case, they appear to have been misled by someone in apparent authority." "Will there be any official action regarding the HOA president who issued this?" I asked. "I am citing multiple violations in my report, including improper authorization of hunting on private lands and bypassing of landowner consent requirements. This report will be filed with the county prosecutor's office as well as the state wildlife department." He handed me an official copy. "This should help with your insurance claim as well. It clearly establishes that the access was improperly granted." Armed with the wildlife officer's report, I contacted my insurance company again. This time, the conversation took a different tone. "The official report definitely changes the situation," my adjuster acknowledged. "With government documentation that the hunting permission was improperly granted, we can process this under your policy's livestock loss coverage rather than treating it as an authorized access incident. While the insurance would not cover all my losses, particularly the future breeding income, it would at least handle Thunder's medical expenses and his base value as a breeding animal." The local newspaper reporter, David Chen, met me at a coffee shop in town. I had carefully selected which documents to share, focusing on facts rather than accusations. "I am not looking for a hit piece," I explained. I just want the community to have transparency about how the HOA is being managed. Chen's interest visibly increased as I showed him the receipt from L. Morrison Consulting for the hunting permissions. This raises serious questions, he noted. The HOA is a nonprofit entity. Board members cannot personally profit from their positions. The monthly HOA meeting is next Tuesday, I told him. I plan to present my findings to the community. It might be a story worth covering. He nodded thoughtfully. I will be there. My third attorney, Jason Thompson, who had joined our neighborhood coalition, helped identify the strongest legal points to emphasize. Focus on the breach of fiduciary duty and the clear violation of HOA authority limitations, he advised. The emotional impact of your injured bull will sway the room, but the financial improprieties will be what forces board action. The evening before the monthly HOA meeting, I prepared my presentation with military precision. Each slide contained clear evidence without unnecessary commentary. Supporting documents were copied for every expected attendee. I had prepared responses for any potential objection Linda might raise. Thunder had been released from the veterinary center that afternoon, now recovered enough to return to the ranch. Though no longer the magnificent breeding specimen he once was, his presence in the pasture was a powerful reminder of why this fight mattered. From my office window, I could see him slowly exploring his familiar territory. For you, I said quietly, and for everyone else she has bullied. I rehearsed my opening statement one final time, ensuring my voice remained steady and factual rather than emotional. Linda had built her power on intimidation and fear. My response would be calm, methodical, and devastating in its precision. As darkness fell, I reviewed the evidence one final time, confirming every claim was thoroughly documented. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation that would either free our community from Linda's tyrannical control or escalate the conflict to a new level. Either way, there would be no returning to the status quo. The HOA meeting would mark the beginning of the end of Linda Morrison's reign. Her betrayal would finally be exposed to the full light of community scrutiny. The community center parking lot overflowed 30 minutes before the scheduled HOA meeting. Word had spread through the neighborhood that something significant would happen tonight. Residents who had never attended a meeting arrived early to secure seats. The local newspaper reporter, David Chen, set up in the back corner, notebook ready. Linda arrived with her usual entourage of supportive board members, faltering momentarily at the sight of the packed room, before smoothing her expression into a practiced smile. She approached the podium with her typical confident stride, though her eyes darted nervously across the unusual attendance. Welcome to the monthly meeting of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association, she began, shuffling through her prepared agenda. We have a full schedule tonight, so we will move quickly through routine matters before addressing new business. She attempted to rush through budget approvals and minor administrative items, clearly hopping to minimize time for public comments. When she finally reached that section, I was the first to raise my hand. Mr. Harrison, she acknowledged with visible reluctance, you have 3 minutes for comments. I approached the front with my laptop and a stack of documents. I will need more than 3 minutes. I am here to present evidence of serious breaches of HOA authority and fiduciary duty by the current president. This is not the appropriate forum for personal grievances, Linda interrupted, her knuckles whitening around the edges of her folder. Robert Johnson, the sympathetic board member, spoke up. I move that we allow Mr. Harrison to present his information. Given the recent incidents involving his property, the community deserves to hear this. Another board member seconded, and Linda found herself outvoted on the procedural matter. I connected my laptop to the projector as murmurs spread through the audience. The first slide appeared: unauthorized actions and financial discrepancies in Whispering Pines HOA leadership. Linda's dismissive laugh died quickly as I methodically presented document after document. On November 15th, hunters with this permission document entered my private property and shot my championship breeding bull, I began, displaying the hunting permission letter with Linda's signature. This document was issued without board approval and in direct violation of the original HOA covenant, which explicitly prohibits granting recreational access to private property without owner consent.